Good morning, students. In last lecture, we have seen what is membrane transport. So we have done with passive transport. Passive transport does not require energy to transport the molecule across the membrane, right? And in case of passive transport, there is transport of molecules from higher concentration to lower concentration. There are different types of passive transport, that is osmosis, simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion takes place through some protein, that is carrier mediated protein. So there is attachment of molecules to that carrier, and then there will be conformational change, so that attached or binded molecule that can be expelled other side of the cell, right? So that is facilitated diffusion. In today's lecture, we are going to see what is active transport and transport of types of active transport. So what is active transport? So there is transport of molecules across the membrane from, keep in mind, from an area of lower concentration to area of higher concentration, and that is done through by utilizing energy. That's mean active transport require energy. Why? Because there is transport of molecules against the concentration gradient, or from lower concentration to higher concentration. And how this energy is achieved or derived? That energy is derived through ATP, that is meant by ATP hydrolysis. ATP is hydrolyzed into ADP and inorganic phosphate, and that inorganic phosphate is utilized as a energy. Other than ATP, there are different compound or different form of energy is also utilized. For example, ion concentration gradient, then absorbance of light and flow of electron. So other than ATP, there is utilization of ion concentration gradient, then absorbance of light and flow of transport. So these are another form of energy that is also utilized in the active transport. There are two types of active transport. One is primary transport and another is secondary transport. So we will see what is primary and secondary transport. So in primary active transport, there is use of energy in the form of ATP, right? So there is ATP is hydrolyzed and there is release of energy, and that energy is utilized for the transport of molecules, right? And that molecules are transported through the protein, and that protein will act as a pump. And those pumps are enzymes. Why enzymes? Because the ATP is hydrolyzed into ADP and inorganic phosphate. So that's why those pump or those transporter are ATPases. For example, primary ATPase pump is sodium potassium pump, which maintains the cell potential. So now what is secondary active transport? So in this, there is no utilization of ATP as energy source. There is utilization of ion concentration gradient or electrochemical gradient to transport the molecule against the concentration gradient. Keep in mind, right? So this energy which is stored in the form of ion concentration difference, so that is utilized. For example, I will show you one diagram, one table. So you can see in this table, so for example, in case of sodium ion, right? So outside the cell, sodium ion concentration is higher. You can see 150 millimolar. So that is at extracellular concentration. But inside the cell or intracellular concentration is 10 millimolar, right? So this is about sodium. But in case of potassium, you can see 5 millimolar. That is lower concentration outside the cell. But inside the cell, there is 140 millimolar potassium ion concentration. So this is ion difference or gradient ion difference across the membrane, inside and outside the membrane, and that is utilized for the transportation in the secondary active transport. So you can also see the chloride, calcium and H plus ion concentration inside and outside the cell. So you can take the help of this diagram also. So for channel protein, there is no change in the protein conformation. In case of carrier mediated transport, there is change in conformational change. So this is passive transport. There is transport of molecules from higher concentration to lower concentration. You can see the arrow. Simple diffusion, so that will take place through the membrane. Facilitated diffusion, that will take through the channel or carrier protein. Keep in mind, right? But in case of active transport, the transport is against the concentration gradient, lower concentration to higher concentration, and that require energy, right? So now we are going to see the example of primary active transport. There are different types of pump: P class pump, V, F, ABC super family. So these are ATP powered pumps. That means these all 4 pumps require energy released from ATP. So you can see in all this diagram there is ATP hydrolysis, right, for the transportation of molecules. So you can see there is transportation of H plus ions. So we are going to see sodium potassium pump, which is the example of which is P class pump, and which is the example of primary active transport, right? So in case of, as we have seen in one table, there is high concentration of sodium ion outside the cell, right? And inside this cell there is low concentration of sodium ion and higher concentration of potassium ion. And so this pump, sodium potassium ATPase pump, will help in the maintaining this ion concentration. That's mean the low cytosolic sodium ion concentration, high cytosolic potassium ion concentration. This concentration is maintained by sodium potassium pump. So we are going to see how. So this pump will pump the sodium and potassium ion in the ratio of 3:2. So at a time there will be 3 sodium ion and 2 potassium ion will be transported, right? So what happened during ATP hydrolysis or before ATP hydrolysis, there is 3 sodium ions are pumped out of the cell and 2 potassium ions are pumped in. Keep in mind, the 3 sodium ions are pumped out of the cell and 2 potassium ions are pumped inside the cell. And for this transportation there is requirement of energy, and that is done through the ATP hydrolysis. So I will show you one diagram. So you can see, so there is attachment of sodium ions, right? So they from inside the cell, right? So ATP is converted into ADP, and this phosphate group will attach to this pump, right? Then after attaching phosphate group to this pump, the sodium ion will be expelled outside the cell. So that's mean in the extracellular space. After that, 2 calcium ion will bind to this pump, and after binding of potassium ion to this pump, the phosphate group will be released and the potassium ion will be pumped inside the cell, and this protein or this pump will get its original conformation, right? So you can see there will be conformational change upon the binding of sodium ions, because this sodium ion should be expelled outside the cell and potassium ion should be pumped inside the cell. So you can take help of this explanation. So the sodium ions will bind to the protein on the inside of the membrane, then ATP is hydrolyzed and the phosphate is transferred to the protein, and then there will be change in the conformation. Then that will allow the sodium ions to be expelled to the external space. Then potassium ion will bind to the protein and the phosphate group will be released, and that will cause the protein to get its original conformation, and that will allow the potassium ion to diffuse inside the cell. So this is the example of primary active transport. So now we will see secondary active transport. So there are two types of secondary active transport: antiporter, that is also termed as counter transport. Another is symporter, that is also termed as a co-transport. We are going to see one by one. So what is antiporter or counter transport? So in this, anti means against. So in this secondary active transport, so there is transportation of two ions at a time but in opposite direction across the membrane, and that will done through the protein, right? So that is ion channels, right? So how this pump will get energy? So one ion will be allowed to flow or to transport from higher concentration to lower concentration, and that will gives energy to move another molecule to pass through through membrane from lower to higher concentration. So that is antiporter, means there is transportation of two molecules at a time in opposite direction, right? So one molecule will transport from higher to lower concentration, and that will give energy to another molecule to transport from lower to higher concentration. That is the example of this antiporter is calcium exchanger or calcium transporter, anti-transporter. So you can see in this diagram antiporter, sir, right? The red dot here, so you can see that it's entering in the cell, while the the black molecule is existing from the cell, right? So that is antiporter, the transport of two molecules in opposite direction. Then we are going to see symporter. So you can see in this diagram, so two molecules will be passed in same direction, not in opposite direction. And how did this will get the energy? So one molecule will pass from higher concentration to lower concentration, and that will gives energy to another molecule to pass from lower to higher concentration. But keep in mind, both molecule will pass in same direction, not in opposite direction. Then there is another one more type is uniporter. So in uniporter there will be transportation of only one molecule at a time, not two molecules. So you can see in this diagram. An example of symporter is glucose transporter. So glucose is transported with sodium ions. So this is about active transport. Keep in mind, antiporter means transportation of two molecules at a time in opposite direction. Symporter means transportation of two molecules in same direction at a time. Thank you.